start at the top with the secretary. We're looking to be updated on pretty much uh, all your activity since we last met as a legislature, and with a primary focus on the economic recovery grants, the whole history, what's transpired, and what your proposals are going forward. This will be the first of probably several meetings that will probably result in some legislation. We'd also like a weaving in of the new COVID relief bill and how it affects businesses, especially the tax deductibility of the PPP grants. And so you're on. Take it away.
All right. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development. And it's really great to see you all. I hope many of you were able to get a little bit of downtime in between the last session and now. Welcome to the new Senate members. I look forward to working with you. I really don't want to take up a lot of airtime because I know you want to get right to the heart of the conversation, which is about the recovery efforts. So I just got a message. It sounds like you would like to start with Deputy Secretary Brady this morning. Does that sound good?
That would be good, but I would like to hear your overview of plus, minus, good, bad. Are you happy?
Yeah.
It seems like we did as a state get a lot of money, and we got the money out the door very quickly. I know a lot of people would have preferred to see a little more targeting, but that's always the pressure in terms of getting the money out the door quickly. But
Absolutely.
Overall, as a secretary, are you pleased with your work?
I'm incredibly pleased with our work. Again, I owe a lot to you, all the legislators as well, for working with us and trusting us to get these grants out the door and to provide us with an opportunity to have some marketing money to get the messaging out there. And yes, I'm very happy about it. Obviously, I have some concerns. Is it enough? I think time is going to tell, but overall, the work that was accomplished in a really small period of time, in my mind, is incredible. And it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the collaboration here of everybody on this Zoom, but also the team in the agency. Folks worked, as you know, around the clock and returned calls on Sundays and nights and you name it. And we've received a fair amount of feedback from folks who, are so relieved to have the grant money and as well as, a little bit out of our hands, but the federal relief, the PPP and the EIDL loans. So overall, I feel really good about what we've accomplished. There's obviously that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that we can't stop. We have to keep going. So our team has continued, and you'll hear, from them on this, but we've continued to host webinars to help employers navigate, not just how to financially navigate COVID, but what happens when you have a COVID case in your business and now you're short-staffed, right? So there's a variety of things that continue to happen. They continue to seek our guidance. Again, for those who aren't as familiar, our agency, when the pandemic first appeared in our state, when COVID appeared in our state, I should say, our agency, which has generally been about revenue generating and promotion and growing the economy and fostering vibrant downtowns, we were tasked with providing guidance that essentially was asking in-person business operations to suspend. So it was a really difficult task, but what we saw was Vermonters' willingness to step up and prioritize health. And so, the economy has taken a hard hit. I think the government definitely has stepped up and ensured that we have some money to replace that revenue that was lost by so many. So our team, again, we've had to pivot from, one mindset to another, and I think we've done it. And now, we're starting, we know the recovery is going to continue, but we're starting to really think about how we can come out strong as we are on the other side of this. I feel like we're on the back stretch. So Yeah, overall proud, feel very, very proud, but still very, very concerned about our employers. And I know that we have to keep propping them up and giving them the support they need to survive this.
So I personally want to thank you for all the work your agency has done, high quality work. And, you're relatively a small agency within state government, and all of a sudden you became center stage, and you really risen to the occasion. So we really appreciate it. One of the reasons I asked Heather to come is we are very concerned with the back end, and Vermont has somewhat of a unique image at this point in terms of being a safe place to come and do business and to change our demographics. So I wanted to start talking about that as well, what we're doing to promote that. So one final thought is that personally, as you know, I felt a little frustrated with the pressure that the legislature had. I've often said that if we were going to design a program like this, it probably would take us 2 years to do it. And we had like 2 days and 2 weeks. So we put our trust in you and gave the broadest of guidelines to design it. But that would not be my first choice, all things being equal. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We felt that pressure as well and appreciate that you trusted us, but also very much recognize that it was unusual. So I thought we'd start off on the slide deck that we prepared for you folks. It's on your, let me just get the name of the ACCD Department Overview. I'm going to skip around on that slide deck. I'm not going to death by PowerPoint you, don't worry. But if we can go to the 4th slide, and if you'd like, I can share my screen. That'd be okay, Mr. Chairman, or?
Is it on our website, Ted? It sounds like it is.
It is, yep, it's.
Then we could all access it.
Okay, great. It's the ACCD Department Overview under my name on today's testimony.
Yep, right at the top.
Yep, and I want to take you down to page 4. The pages are numbered, thanks to Jess Ventnor. Thank you, Jess. That's a detail I might have missed. And this is just a coronavirus relief fund appropriations table. I want to go over just 2 slides. That's my contribution today. And then, Mr. Chairman, Heather, Joan, and Josh really are the masterminds behind executing the vision you gave them and creating more of a vision. They are people that I will forever be indebted to for working harder than anybody I've ever seen work and working smarter than anybody I've ever seen work that way. So they can really get deep, but I wanted to give you the big one. And so on page 4, you'll see this is the list of the coronavirus relief fund programs that the legislature gave us. The ACCD total number at the bottom, that $190 million with the caret and the asterisk next to it, of course, that's how much money we ended up being appropriated. And by that, I mean, some of these had weird waterfalls that if not this, then that, then ACCD gets the money. Some of these were reimbursed by other agencies. So that $190 million doesn't add up to probably what you remember putting in the legislation. In addition to that, this includes some JFC transfers that happened in the last few months. It doesn't include all of them because some of them went to tax. And so one of those, I think the caret, includes the $76 million that was appropriated to tax, but then also there were tens of millions of dollars that JFC gave to tax in the last 3 months. So you'll see on one of Joan's slides, the economic recovery grant was, $300 million in the end, but ACCD only directly administered that second line, 120 million or so. We had a hand in all of it, but this is what actually came through our shop. So I want to really quickly run through each of these, and then our commissioners can get into the details. So first, you folks, we received $750,000 for salaries and expenses. This is to cover things like what I did yesterday, which was help people open a gym, help people figure out whether or not they can have a ski race competition, talk about vaccination policy, talk about PPP, talk about economic injury disaster loans. So our entire staff is still repurposed doing that. I have 4 people in our agency all they do all day is respond to phone calls from people asking for tips on how to operate safely. So that's where that money went. The next line, Joan's going to cover this, that $120 million, that number's still moving a little left and right, but it's going to end up pretty close to there for what we administered in economic recovery grants. That was the revenue loss replacement program. The Vermont Community Loan Fund, this was the $5 million minority and woman-owned set aside. We spent much more than $5 million in women and minority-owned businesses, but this is what was appropriated. And in the end, we spent like $4.9 million of that, and some waterfall down to that 120. So one of the carrots down here also says that this 190 million is a little overstated by about $250,000 because some of this money internally waterfalled to economic recovery grants, but only about $250,000. Just a reminder on the community loan fund money, though set aside, we could not have done that without three incredible organizations that we should all put more muscle behind. The Center for Women in Enterprise, Gwen, again, deserves to be put on a Hall of Fame. They put together this incredible resource page on how to put together a profit and loss statement. They were doing one-on-one technical assistance, answering phone calls. They have this incredible group of neat people doing great work. Will Belanger, obviously we all know and trust him and his team to do great things, and Curtis Reed with the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. Curtis was doing one-on-one technical assistance with cab drivers and God knows who else to build these incredibly complex financial statements that people didn't know how to do. So real kudos to them. The Vermont Arts Council, we administered this $5 million in partnership with the Arts Council. And again, Amy and the team, Amy Cunningham and the executive director at the Arts Council Karen did an incredible job walking us through this. We partnered with them. A lot of this money came right through Salesforce. However, some of it was administered directly by the Arts Council. The NR Outdoor Rec program, you know this story. We partnered with them to get the business money out to 35 businesses. Working Lands Enterprise Fund was administered by Ag, but we had the accounting code, so that's why that shows up here. The Restart Business Technical Assistance, this $3.25 million. This was the program we partnered with the Regional Development Corporations, Champlain College, and NCIC, and the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. By all accounts, this has been a wild success. We partnered Vermont businesses that provided technical assistance with Vermont businesses that needed technical assistance, and we paid for that technical assistance. So we helped build websites. We helped get QuickBooks training. We helped do photography for their websites. We helped with inventory management plans. Go down a long list. It was a real great success. Everyone Eats, the program that I have yet to find somebody to say it wasn't a good idea. So kudos, because I think it originated in this committee with some help from the Sustainable Jobs Fund and others. We are currently on a pause in this program, but this, in case anybody doesn't remember, this is the program where we provided restaurants with funding to feed those who are hungry. And they have specific targets to include local food, so farms. And to date, you can see about 550,000 meals, 150 restaurants, and 166 farms have benefited from this. We were doing, I think it was 40,000 meals a week right before Christmas. And Gary Holloway and Sevka deserve all the kudos on this one. We are on a pause today, really at the request of the providers at Sevka, because they needed to get some ducks in a row. But we anticipate having enough money to fund this for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and you will see a proposal from the administration to fund this for the rest of the state of emergency coming shortly. Ski Area Recreation Safety Grant Program. This was to help ski areas open safely. They did things like buy RFID technology so they can do contact tracing, put outside furniture and windbreaks up, put their rental equipment in different areas, manage crowds, buy PPE. This program is fully subscribed. with 34 ski areas, everything from the Hard Axe up in St. Albans to the east, what's the one in Corinth? I forgot this yesterday too. The little ski area in Corinth, the east slopes, all the way to the big guys of the Magics, to the Killingtons, to the Vail resorts. Landlord technical assistance, mortgage assistance program, rental housing stabilization program, rehousing recovery program. All these housing things touch tens of thousands of people in the end, and they're oversubscribed. The good news, which you'll hear about later, is we have $200 million from the federal government coming for rental assistance, which should help us meet some of this need. And on the rehousing recovery program, the $6.2 million, this was the VHIP that you folks have helped us shepherd through in normal times. As the governor preluded in his inaugural, you can expect to see a request to expand this in the coming year. And then Heather and her team had two appropriations, one for consumer stimulus, which was the marketing organizations, the 60 or so micro grants we did to help downtown organizations do buy local programs, but also the big NIFT program where we provided the $30 stimulus incentives to businesses, more than that in some instances, and touched 1,000 businesses or so in a short period of time with about $500,000. And then the Restart Vermont marketing, that's the bigger marketing push that Heather can tell you about shortly, where we did everything from put on crowd, new innovative music content to attract tens of thousands of people from all over the country and world to learn a little more about Vermont, to telling people that they should only come here if they've quarantined and can touch their nose and rub their belly at the same time. So a long list of things that Heather can go on. So that's the 190 million. Before I break, I want to take you down to page 8. So page 8 of that same document, it says a look ahead to 2021 legislative agenda. We've bucketed what we're going to come to you in the next few weeks into 3 buckets: recovery, reemployment, and reinvestment. And they're sort of in that order too. When it comes to recovery, we know, and Joan will go over this in detail, that we have some businesses that were not assisted by Economic Recovery 1.0 or 2.0, and best we can tell, they will not be assisted by the Paycheck Protection Program 2.0, EIDL, or this shuttered venue program the SBA is going to run. So we know we need to come to you with a package to try to help those businesses so we don't lose them. The most obvious one is new businesses that started after February 15th. You must be getting the phone calls like Joan and I are. It's nice that it's not overwhelming, but they are really compelling and good stories that we need to help. So we're going to come to you with a proposal there. I can't share too much more. Maybe Joan will have a little more, but the reality is we're waiting to put the budget finally together so that we can tell you what we think we can do. The second piece of recovery is marketing of economic development, tourism, and outdoor rec. We're going to be coming to you with a proposal. We need to regain our market share. We've lost market share. People are skiing in New Hampshire and Maine today because we make it hard to come here. It's the right thing to do, but we need to regain that market share. Our economic development marketing, we've lost some of that momentum. As the chairman said, we have a great story to tell today, but we need money to tell it, to remind people you can come live here. It's a safe thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's good for your family, good for us. So that's the buckets of recovery. That's going to mean money, right? The second bucket, reemployment. A big piece of this is going to be your time with Commissioner Harrington and his friends. Unemployment insurance relief. So our trust fund is down by half since this whole thing started. Employer rates are obviously a little uncertain and people are nervous. The best thing we can do is to make sure that unemployment trust fund is solvent, but also that it doesn't bankrupt businesses while we try to make sure that moves forward. So there will be a proposal there. And then I bucketed the Vermont Relocated Worker Grant Program, which is a combination of the remote worker and the new worker program here too. We're going to come to you with a proposal to really double down on the value proposition of moving to Vermont. So the third bucket, I'm almost done.
Love
it. Thanks. The third
No,
bucket
love it.
is reinvestment. And I've got 4 in here. This list may grow by the time the budget comes to you, but the 4 big ones, we talked about place-based tax increment financing last year. We think we need to reinvest in our communities or they will continue to suffer from disinvestment. If you don't recall this, this is making TIF just usable by a small town that might only have 5 or 6 parcels that will benefit from a single project. A couple $1 million cap per project, things along those lines. The Vermont Housing Incentive Partnership, already mentioned this. This is coming to you. Housing, we're talking about not only rental housing here, we're going to bring to you a proposal to target homeowners as well, to allow them to fix up homes in some of our neighborhoods that need the most work. And we're going to have a minority and BIPOC set aside so that hopefully we can target some new Vermonters to come to Vermont and purchase some property. Modernize and improve Act 250. We all know we have work to do that was unfinished from the last session, so we'll rock and roll on that together. And then finally, another thing you folks have been so supportive of is increasing the downtown tax credit. We're going to come to you with another proposal on downtown tax credits this year. So that's just a look ahead. I'll pause if you want it to do Q&A now. That might be okay, but if you'd rather just go to Joan, she's the one with all the answers.
I think we need to parse all of these out. I will say that it's amazing how many bills I've asked to be drafted that propose all of these same things. So that's good news. I don't know how much they can all be taken care of within the budget or which ones will need separate substantive legislation, but a lot of good ideas here. So does anybody have, I mean, I have a ton of questions just based upon what you're saying here, but I think it'd be better to get to peel back the onion a little bit and get into the individual programs. So I'll reserve my questions. Does anybody,
Michael, Becca had a question.
Okay, and one thing I would suggest is that there be a set on the chart on page, and maybe you'll get into this, on the chart on page 4, the 190 million, if there could be some, and I could probably do the math myself, but if there could be some sort of column that indicates what the average grant is, you know, more specificity on who's the number of businesses that were served, the size of the size of the grants that went out, what sort of the range is. I don't know if there's some bar graphs floating around that gives us a better picture of how this money went out, especially in the recovery grant program.
So we have a full report due on February 15th. So we're working with tax to aggregate all the data now. But as soon as we have those, I can send them to you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I don't have people's pictures up right now. Allison, did you have a question?
No, Becca did.
I'm sorry, Becca.
Good morning, Ted. Really nice to see you. And I'm not sure if this question is best posed to Ted or to Heather. I understand the concern about just looking even at the issue of just like the number of people who are coming up to ski in Vermont. Let's just take that for a moment. Do we have real-time data about what our numbers are now compared to last year at this time? I took my kids skiing the weekend after the Christmas holiday. My bad, terrible idea. Okay, crazy crowded at Mount Snow. But so the issue for me was it didn't seem to me to be any less crowded than it usually is. It was packed. The lift lines were, I mean, we waited a half hour every single time. And so I just want to sort of put some shape around this. Is this anecdotal that not as many people are coming? I understand we have stricter guidelines, but I don't know if people are actually following them. So that's my question. And we may not have the data, but I'd love to hear your impression of that.
Yeah, Heather, can I take a first shot and you can fill in? So we have asked for data And a good one quick data point was the big storm we had. Well, you had, I didn't have it up here in Williston. We did some data comparison on the southern Vermont ski areas. And that weekend, that Saturday after the 3.5 feet of snow that you received, we were down 10% in the southern Vermont ski areas. We also did, we've also asked the ski areas to aggregate their area, their daily visits, so that we can compare those. We haven't done a comparison in the last couple of weeks, but we're asking them to aggregate that so we can compare it and see if our policies are in fact having an impact. The other data we've collected is pass refunds and lodging. And so over the Christmas holiday, a place like Jay was at 50 to 70% reduction in their room nights. Jay and Smugs were about that number. And so we've collected that sort of data. And then there have been some informal studies done. So Jay went through their parking lot on one of the holiday weekends and looked at license plates and found that 70% of the license plates were from Vermont, which is really unusual. The other things that are working against us in the public relations understanding of the ski areas are we've had a relatively difficult winter, in that the snow came, the snow left, and some places the snow never came. So they have really limited terrain open. So the crowds look worse than they are. And then the second issue is the lift lines. We've required them to reduce capacity to 50% on their lifts. And we've required them to spread their lift lines out so that people are 6 feet apart, which the big problem has been side to side, right? So it makes the line, in some cases, 3 to 4 times longer. The line is socially distanced, but it's still a lot of people in a space. So those have been some of the things we're working against, but we do have some data that shows that, in fact, people are responding to our call, and that the ski areas, I think the really important thing that Dr. Levine and others have verified is that the ski areas themselves have not been a center of outbreaks of people skiing, being in lift lines, being on the lifts.
Thanks, Ted. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I would add, and you know, Ted made a great point that it's really about how people are behaving at these areas that, you know, because of the lack of terrain, they can't otherwise spread out as they normally would. And again, because of the ghost lanes and the waiting for the lift and so forth, that there's that perception that it's either longer, again, people aren't spread out. I think the other thing to note is that the message has come across loud and clear about being prepared to use your car as a base lodge. And we are seeing very little activity inside lodges. Now, again, this may be, you know, a reflection of the weather. It hasn't been, you know, below zero for extended periods of time yet. So, you know, that will be tested. But I think that's the other thing that we're seeing just in terms of how people are behaving when they're at the resort, you know, in addition to the safety measures that have been put into place.
Randy has a question.
Senator Brock.
Thank you. Just a question in general. The $190 million expenditure, as with all other expenditures under the CARES Act, has been, and I think nationally reported, a major target for fraud. Other states have experienced substantial losses and substantial threats. My question is, what is your agency doing with respect to each of these programs to detect and prevent fraud? And what result, if any, have you seen so far?
Joan, do you want to kind of talk about the economic recovery grant plan and how we've tried to prevent that? I think that's obviously the Achilles heel, just because it's the largest dollar figure, not because of any other reason.
Sure. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. I guess can't talk about fraud risk without talking about the whole review process. So I could go into that level of detail.
Well, I'm not looking for that level of detail
Okay.
at this point, obviously, given our time factor. And it may be something that you can address in writing at a later point. But what I'm really asking is, do you have a fraud prevention program with respect to the expenditure of these funds, and what does it consist of?
Sure. So just succinctly, and we could provide you with the review manuals that we composed as we did these, right? So we had a two-step review process. We required source documentation to prove out revenues. We required tax returns so that we could check to see whatever representation was being made in the application was actually what was filed with the tax authorities. We also had checks with our Vermont tax department to see about domicile. So we had a number of checks and balances to kind of sort of stop the people who are misrepresenting from getting an award. So there's first to stop them from getting an award to begin with. And there were a number of denials and a number of people who were found ineligible. The other level of check is that we did find a few that should not have gotten funds, and we're in the process of clawback. And we are also now in the process, now that everyone was dispersed funds, that we're going to create a subset of folks to go back and do I don't know whether it's a 10% or 20% audit to ensure that everyone who got the funds deserved the funds. I could make those available to the committee if you'd like to review that so that you have it on the record.
So I just would follow up with Senator Brock's question. As you think about that and providing information to Senator Brock and the committee, I think even a bigger question is the one that you've heard directly from me, Commissioner Goldstein, in our private conversations, but also I understand you heard from the Joint Fiscal Committee as well, is that people taking advantage of the program that didn't do so fraudulently, totally within their rights, but questionable need being there. And if we have any handle on that at all, if there's any way of checking that, I've heard Senator Kitchell say several times, in the list, they saw all kinds of businesses like lobbying groups and lawyer offices and accountants' offices that they were questioning whether, the need was really there. And that's in part of the need to get the money out the door really quickly. But, when a chapter is written on the history of this program, nobody's at fault here. We had to get the money out the door quickly, and you just compromise some of the fine tuning, but it would be sort of a good chapter to have lessons learned in terms of how something like this could be structured.
Yeah, I understand there was misgivings about particular businesses that should or should not have gotten, and I think assumptions are made about whether or not there was need from the outside, but from the inside, I could say that every single applicant had to do the same level of source documentation. So, I did hear the criticisms that accountants and lawyers, for example, should not get the money, but nowhere was that in the guideline. So I think we have to look into the application to see if there was indeed need. I think there was a fair amount of second guessing about the methodology about using top line revenue. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is whatever methodology you use, there will be some that gain and some that lose. So happy to provide our review sheets. Our reviews did require everyone to submit source documentation. If there was an issue with the methodology, we would have had to change it before we embarked, not make different rules for different types of businesses midstream.
Understood.
Yeah.
And also the state auditor's office is doing a performance audit, so I'm sure we'll have a lot of lessons learned from whatever findings they have.
Keisha has a question.
Thanks.
Senator,
Thank you. I'm open to whether or not there's more presentation before you answer some of these questions. Just to underscore what the chairman said, I think, for example, with the minority and women-owned business, my rough calculation of the rough average would be about $7,500, but I know there's overhead, and that would be the, you know, the mean, not the median. So I think it's helpful for some of these to see both, you know, what the overall average grant would be, but also what it sort of the more normalized center would be of the grants, especially for that program. I'd be interested. For the rental assistance piece, especially since we have more money coming in, and just how do we improve that? Any metrics you have about evictions that were stopped, or people that were able to stay in their homes, their average age, et cetera. And then I have one sort of interesting data point that stuck with me from the utility assistance program. I know that's completely separate from the CARES Act, but for example, when BED reached out to every single person who had arrears of utilities owed, and they still only had about 20% uptake, because people are just so underwater and so overwhelmed that it's very hard for them to actually fill out a form or figure out what to do to participate. And so just knowing, you know, how quickly we could get that money, how efficiently we can do it without a lot of requirements would be helpful. And finally, obviously my ears perked up about, you know, partnerships to recruit more people of color, more young people to Vermont. I would just start by saying, you know, I think we have a retention problem more than a recruitment problem. I've talked to a number of people who've come here through the Stay to Stay program, and they lack community, particularly, you know, as Black folks or people of color. And so I just, alongside recruitment, I'd really like to see a robust thought process around retention of those folks, because we are competing with other states for a more diverse workforce, and they can vote with their feet. And I'm actually seeing a lot of people of color move when they don't feel safe to Chittenden County. And then if they don't get what they need in Chittenden County, they're leaving the state. And that I think is our workforce problem, even more so than actually getting people to think about Vermont. But once someone leaves and says to someone else, this is not a safe place, we're never going to get them back, and we're going to lose a lot of other people. So I just want to hear more about retention as well.
Just before we get to the retention thing, I wanted to touch on the rental housing stabilization program. I forgot to mention in my comments that the Vermont State Housing Authority was the administrator for these funds. We were simply the grantor, and their reporting will include that sort of information, Senator. So that'll be coming shortly.
And then on the women and minority set aside, bear in mind that the set aside was only used for the sole props in those categories, because there was no other avenue for them to get funding elsewhere. So when I believe Deputy Secretary Brady referenced that we gave way more than the 5 million, and this is tough because we don't have our full-on report, but our report will give average. I'm not sure we could do median. I mean, I think we can, but it would take, I'm not sure how we would do that without having to count out every single application to determine what the midway point was between each, but we'll look at it. There was another question in there.
Well,
retention. Okay, retention. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a proposal for that right now. I think it's a very, that's a, how do I say that? A global issue. It's something that more than a state agency could basically prevent. I think that the first part was that we had a new worker program and we thought it was working. And so that idea would be, could we replenish that? And then retention is really a very local situation. We work with the locals in the Stay to Stay network to, make sure they're doing welcome wagons and all the rest of it. But there are so many variables as to why somebody is going to leave. I can't think of a government initiative that would make people stay. And maybe I'm being naive or sort of dismissive, but I'm really open to ideas on that. We have not figured that one out. That's there are so many variables. So
Randy has a question.
I would just like to see some data regarding retention to confirm or deny that there is a problem, and if so, how extensive is the problem? And as we refer to minority-owned businesses, to know statistically, is there any difference in terms of retention among people and among businesses in Vermont? Before we solve a problem, let's really understand whether there is a problem.
Well, let's
Agreed.
also, let me ask Senator Rahm when she's asking that question. You were talking about retention of people who are newcomers here, or are you talking probably not a bigger problem, they're both big problems, but one that we often hear about is young people leaving the state that grew up here.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways to slice this and get more information. Just to Senator Brock's point, for example, I would be curious if the agency could do a little more of a qualitative approach to stay, a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out. You know, our different segments of the population we recruit having different issues. You know, there's a lot of stay folks that I've personally tried to build community for because they didn't necessarily have it in their welcome wagon to a particular town or community. If ACCD doesn't, you know, have a staff person who identifies as BIPOC, I think that would be really helpful if you're about to engage in recruitment and retention efforts. For example, to what the deputy commissioner said, with programs that might help attract people as homeowners, I think it would be really good to start with the people who are here and trying to commit to the state and having a hard time doing that, because I think those are people who are anecdotally, I've heard, deciding to leave because there's a Bhutanese Nepali Senior Center where their family can go in Pennsylvania, or there are a lot more sort of, you know, housing options for them in Minnesota. But we are anecdotally losing new Americans because they are a huge part of the attraction in a state to the workforce. And, you know, they have a lot of other options for a foothold in the community and the economy where they go. I mean, as I will be a broken record saying, we barely got information out in other languages for weeks in this pandemic related to health and the economy. And they don't have to put up with that. They can go somewhere that is doing a lot better job retaining them and speaking to them as state government.
So Senator Clarkson is our resident workforce development expert. I thought I saw you had your hand up, and also I want to.
So are you able to see now? You don't need me. Are you able to see everybody?
I am, yes.
Okay, great, because you weren't initially.
I just had the screen up before the document.
Got it.
So any thoughts you have would be appreciated. I would say that a lot of the work in this area bridges between ACCD and the Department of Labor as well.
Exactly. I actually was going to say, I hope we have a longitudinal study on the state-to-state people, because if we don't, that's a missed opportunity, because we should be tracking them and finding out what happens to them all, because they're a very defined universe. But I was actually going to say, let's finish the presentation, because this committee is so full of exciting and is so engaged in these issues. We could get sidetracked in questions for a long time before they finish presenting.
Okay, good point. Do any of the presenters or witnesses have anything to add before we start doing a deeper dive into the economic recovery grants?
If I could just make one comment on the state today, and then we'll leave that, you know, for a longer conversation, you know, but I would say, you know, number one, you know, we are certainly open to any and all ideas about, you know, what's our best role here. You know, that program really is dependent, you know, as Joan mentioned, on the regional communities that we work with, you know, and we are definitely looking at how that program evolves. Not only was it a pilot program to begin with, but certainly we're not having the same 3-person, you know, 3-day in-person networking events that started with. So in our proposal going forward, we are looking at, you know, what is State-to-State 2.0 and how can we support those regional organizations? Because, you know, when it gets back to sort of the top of the funnel marketing ideas, like, you know, we're bringing people here, giving them, you know, that idea of what life in Vermont might be, but it's really the regional communities where, you know, that final sale is going to be made or not. And how do we make sure that they do feel welcome once they're there. So it's about supporting those local communities with those welcome wagons. How do folks get involved? Yes, doing, longer term studies. We do survey those folks at, regular intervals. COVID obviously, kind of threw a wrench into a couple of these programs. But we are working on, a CRM management system for the Stay to Stay network so that, somebody who comes into any one region can then interface with either another region who might have a better fit for them with the Department of Labor, the Department of Human Resources. So, we do have it on our minds as to how we can use that network in partnership with other departments in terms of creating that pipeline. But in terms of, what other programs can exist on the ground, whether they're state programs or local programs, I definitely look forward to more conversations about that.
Okay. So just so you folks know, we have a new schedule, which we're going to deviate from right away. We usually take a break 10 minutes at 9:30 and another 10-minute break at 10:30, but we'll go to Joan and get some more details on the economic recovery grant and see if we can find a good stopping point, probably around 9:45 for a break.
So would you like a recap of the and then into sort of who we think is going to be left out and what we could do about that? Or how would you, there's just so much information which we don't have formulated into a finite report, but I could just recap to refresh everyone's memories about the different versions. Does that make sense?
It does. And is there going to be a final report?
Yes.
Yeah.
When
Yes.
will that be due?
We are working with tax to get that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I don't know, Jess.
Yeah, the report is due February 15th. That report will come from the Secretary of Administration and it'll include all CRF funding. So we're preparing some aggregate data with tax right now to make sure that all of the economic recovery grants information is just in one place. It takes quite a bit of time to do that.
Take it away. I mean, we have one new member on this committee, so
Okay.
not as familiar with the programs as the rest of us are, and a lot of us have shorter term memories than others. So we're welcome for you to present in any way you see fit to educate
Sure.
us.
So back in July 6th, can never forget, we unleashed the economic recovery grants, what we're calling now 1.0. We didn't know it was going to be two versions, but the first version was that a business had to prove at least 50% loss in any 1 month, starting from March. And the award calculation was 10% of their 2019 revenue. And so we did this, we embarked on this with tax department. Tax was going to handle all of the folks who filed their rooms and meals and sales and use tax. And that's a great source document because people generally don't overestimate their revenue on their tax forms. So that was a good partnership. They were taking care of the lion's share of retail and food and accommodation, and we were doing everybody else. I mean, just to talk a little bit about the genesis of this, we thought somebody like Department of Tax could do the entire program because they have the systems. And we, just for frame of reference, on any given year, we get about 1-point-something million out on Vermont Training Program grants, and this was for a way larger amount. And what we did is we created a system, and this was a formula that was based in the system so that we avoided some of the manual work. The real work came from reviewing these source documents. As I say, people couldn't just put in a revenue amount. They needed to submit their tax returns, profit and loss statements, so that we could verify all of the information that they put in. The application was opened as a first come, first served, and it had a $50,000 maximum grant. Remember, going in, we had no idea really of the demand. We knew that people were closed, in some cases more than 1 month, and we knew that there was tremendous need out there. We just couldn't really quantify it, so we didn't want to spend it all on the first go. We had a pretty conservative maximum of $50,000. First come, first served, there were a lot of misgivings whether that was fair or not, but it ended up being that we had the application open from July 6th all the way through mid-October. So there was ample time for folks to apply. Along the way, we realized that people are left out, right? Is 10% of 2019 revenue a fair way to do it? Everyone could comment on that and critique it, but we thought, the next time around, what we should do is really assess the unmet need. And the unmet need for the second round, which opened up in November, was for folks to put in their revenue from March through September 30th of 2019 versus their revenue in the same equivalent period in 2020, and then reduce that unmet need by the amount that they've received either in PPP or EIDL or other state grants, so that we had an assessment of where we were. And we thought, we won't do it first come, first serve. What we will do, again, not knowing if we're going to be oversubscribed, we estimated that we would be, that we would get the entire demand curve and then divide by the entire amount of dollars that were available to come up with a proration factor. So that if we were, 50% oversubscribed, everybody gets 50% of their unmet need. And along the way, we opened that in November, and it was a short window. It was like 2 weeks, but it still took us more than a month to do the calculations, to do the review, and to get everyone aligned. Along the way, there was allocations from JFC because of other agencies that had unused funds, and remembering that everyone thought we had a December 30th timeline that we had to spend the money on. Again, people think we got this out as quickly as possible. I don't think the recipients thought it was that quick. I'm not browbeating ourselves, but it was a process. It took a long time, especially 2.0. We had to coordinate, and no one could move until we got all of the grants together. Along the way, the additional money from JFC, it was decided to give the Code 72, Accommodation and Food Services, 100% of their unmet need, just because the unmet need from the food and accommodation sector was so way and above any other sector in the state. And so that's what we did. We were able to take 100% of their unmet need, pay them, and then the remainder would be left for the rest. And so that's what we just completed right before Christmas. Folks we got the money at the factor, ended up being 41.19%. It's like indelibly inked on my brain. So that was kind of the distribution. Now, as we all know, December 27th, the president signed the Economic Aid Act into existence. And so the people who were left out from our grant program, either they missed the deadline or they were found ineligible, or any number of reasons. We feel pretty confident that they could apply to the new PPP round. As we delve deeper into the new act, it's clear, as Deputy Secretary Brady mentioned, new businesses that formed after February 15th will not be eligible to apply for PPP. So we need to do something if we want to keep those businesses open. And there are quite a few, and I'm hearing more and more from them. The other technicality in the new bill is that if you're doing a second draw, like if you got PPP last summer and you want to do a second draw, you need to show a 25% loss in revenue from the same period, 2019 to 2020. And what we're finding is some of them may not have that. It doesn't mean they're any less in need, because they either had increased costs, or in the case of a convenience store, for example, the oil price went up. It doesn't mean, though, that their margins also went up. So we know that there's that, right? That piece. We also know that there's a finite amount of money. So there will be people closed out of it. It's open until March 31st. So we're thinking, what do? We need to come up with something, a methodology, a formula, and a pocket of money. I mean, in actuality, the CARES Act prevented us from including businesses formed after February 15th. And we tried to figure out a way to make that work, and it was a high-risk proposition. So we probably would need general fund money for that. And in terms of quantifying what that need is, it's very difficult because, again, you just know of these cases that come to you, but you don't have a full data set. On a full data set, what we know is in total aggregation, there was 698 million somewhat of unmet need. We dispersed on this last go around, we dispersed about $75, $80 million. So there is still significant unmet need. We also did another sort to sort through businesses that did not apply to PPP the first time around. It doesn't mean that they were ineligible to apply, but they didn't apply. And we know that there's still at least 30 million, and that's just 30 million unmet need, and that's just from the ACCD portion, not the tax portion. So, and yesterday I was on a call with the beverage industry, and I learned of another gap. And the other gap is that if someone didn't apply for the full PPP, because remember at the beginning of this whole game, no one really knew what was going to be forgivable. It was very, very confusing, and this person, miscalculated and only applied for half of what they would have been eligible to do. And so how is he able to then borrow more in this next go around? And it gets complicated real fast if it's a second draw and the revenue percentage loss isn't there. So we know there are complications. We know that the PPP is probably opening to everybody next week, or, I know it opened this week through certain CDFI institutions. So we will start learning of the exceptions. You will start learning of the exceptions. And we feel there is a pressing need to take care of them. What am I missing? I don't know. Like you said, short memories. I feel like mine is also short. So if there's a question I could take now.
I have a comment that I'm sure is not going to surprise you, but I also would like to hear more about the new, what is in the new bill from Washington for small businesses. I understand probably the biggest thing in there is the change in taxability of expenses. But I just have to say, I know I don't think it's going to change anything, but I just think the terminology of unmet need is a misnomer. And every time that's used, it sounds like people's needs are being unmet to that tune, where in reality, unmet need is a loss of revenue, which is not necessarily equate to need, because it doesn't take into account any kind of reduction in costs that people may have had during the same period. On the flip side, it's only for a shorter period than an annual basis. So the number could be higher in that regard. I just think every time it's repeated over and over again that this is the unmet need of business, it overstates the common sense term of need to say the only factor in what you need is the lost revenue. Some businesses work at 5% margins, and how that they can get dollar for dollar replaced on their lost revenue, it's not a true reflection. I wish there's a better term. Loss of revenue over 7 months is a lot of words, but I think it would be a fairer reflection than what unmet need is.
Right. It's really revenue impact. When you compare one year to the next, it's the revenue impact, and then subtracting out what they got. I don't know what else to call it. We wouldn't want to call it net revenue impact because it isn't net revenue impact, but it is the remainder of the revenue impact after you take out that assistance. So I don't know. I mean, it's used very, very often in disaster assistance terminology.
It just makes us sound. I think everybody would agree we got a lot of money in our CARES funding, and we devoted a large percentage of that to help business. But when we say we only were able to give 41% of unmet need, it sounds like we really fell short in our efforts to help business. And maybe we have in some ways, but we've really done a decent job in getting a lot of money out the door to help our business.
Yeah, and it's not meant to imply that. So apologies if that's what it sounds like. It's really more to show the oversubscription.
Right.
We'll talk, Senator Clarkson, I'm sorry.
So no, I tag on to what Michael's saying, because it makes it sound like we weren't incredibly successful keeping people alive and keeping, and as I've said in all my articles and things, is we're never going to be able to make anyone whole with, there's just not enough money to make everybody whole. And unmet need sort of feeds that narrative of, well, like we have any expectation to make anybody whole. Our expectation is to help people survive this pandemic and to keep businesses alive long enough to survive the pandemic. But no one has enough money, feds or states, working together to make them whole. And I think that's the sort of the implication of some of the language. So I get that we need something simple to say it, but it sounds, we've been incredibly successful. You guys have been Trojans. And it sort of has a negative connotation when in fact we should be celebrating what we've been able to do with what we've had.
Yeah, I mean, we are proud of what we've done and what we've accomplished. However, we're not popping out champagne yet.
Yeah,
and we know there's still tremendous, there's tremendous loss.
Right.
So whatever we want to call it, we're open to ideas, but it is a very commonly used term in disaster assistance.
Right, I realize.
So, Joan, are you going to spend, I do want to hear more about the COVID, the second COVID relief bill in terms of any other factors that we can hope to get some help for businesses through that act. But are you going to go through any more details on, like, peeling back the onion on Ted's 190 million, or not the 120 million for economic recovery grants? Do we have any other metrics about who got what and what sectors and things like that?
We do. I don't have that right in front of me.
Okay, so let's just take a break now for 10 minutes and come back and talk to us about, some projections of what help business can expect from at least on the new federal level. We've heard a few of your ideas on the state level, but we need to get our bearings as to what this new round will help businesses. Because in the scheme of things, we've done a great job, but we're still relatively a small percentage of the help business gets compared to what they got on a federal level from PPP and EIDL and things to that effect.
Yeah, if we sent out 300 million and there was 1.2 billion in PPP first time around and 300 million in EIDL, and we did 300 million, I think we were a big part of it. But I'm
not saying we're chump change, but businesses are very significantly dependent upon what the feds do as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. We want to be kind of last.
Let's take a 10-minute break. We're not going to disappear from YouTube, but you guys can go about your business for 10 minutes and come on back, and you can decide among yourselves who needs to be here. I do want to hear from Joan Moore and Heather. And is Josh going to be available today? I know we have him scheduled for either tomorrow or next week, so I don't know if he was planning on being here. But we have plenty to cover, so we'll see you. What time is it now? See you at 9:45. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have, I think, Senator Ballin had to leave us for a little while, but we're ready to go to pick up with Commissioner Goldstein. Jessica has forwarded a presentation that I think is now on our webpage that may help us along. I don't see Commissioner. There she is. Okay. She'll be joining us. And we'll go to around 10:30 and take another 10-minute break. We had a training the other day, and a lot of the chairs agreed that with this Zoom thing, which could be very draining, that it might make sense to take 2 breaks in the course of 3 hours versus 1 long break, 2 mini breaks. So far, I think that's probably sage advice. So let's pick up with Commissioner. If you can educate us about what happened. Was December 27th a magic day? You're muted.
Yeah, I think it was, at least part the way. I'm looking for, and I don't know, Jess, if you located, we had a good presentation with SBA and Bankers Association last week, and we had a PowerPoint on our website, which I'm just looking for, and I don't know if I've located it, but it outlines, the advantages of I don't see it at all.
Jess, you're mute.
I think just.
Jen, I just forwarded it to you, so it's at the top of your email box.
It's the COVID Relief Financial Programs webinar.
Yep. It's pretty extensive, but there's some really good information. It breaks down the PPP program, the EIDL Advance Grant, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, and I think the Employee Retention Tax Credit.
Going forward for this round. This is for stimulus too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So everything that was included in the federal relief bill.
Yeah.
Opening it on my screen, it's taking a while to open, and then I figured we could look at it. But I think that some of the guidance is still coming out. I know that Darcy Carter from SBA has cautioned us that, things do change, but generally speaking, most of our coverage was on PPP and the fact that it's opening, the deductibility of the expenses. EIDL this time is very targeted to what I think are really the new market tax credit areas, the census tract areas. So let's just say, do you want me to share the screen?
I think we all have it.
I think we all
You have it?
hold it
Okay.
up.
I mean, it's a 60-page document.
Well, no, we don't want you to, not much detail. Why don't you touch on the highlights as you see them in your shop and, things that you think are exciting and things that you think are still missing. And that's what trying to get a flavor. I mean, this is not only have the feds given our state a lot of money and CARES money, but this whole thing is a package of programs to try and prop up and sustain businesses. So if we're going to do things on the state level, we need to know what our partners on the federal level have done and how far they've gone and where they potentially missed the mark.
Great. So I'll just focus on the overview then, because I think that the things that we were excited about once this was signed was the fact that just about everybody could now apply for PPP loans, right? It didn't matter if they drew from the first time around. Actually, this is like the third time around for PPP. So there were 2 separate tranches over the summer. And so this gives people an opportunity to go back to the drawing board. They also simplified forgiveness process for those less than 150,000. They clarified the tax provisions, the treatment of the expenses, which was very, very important.
Could you
And it
explain that? Will you explain that one a little bit more, or will you get to that, or?
I'm not going to go into detail on the tax treatment other than that before this came out. So PPP, once it gets forgiven, it's not considered income, it's not taxed. But in addition to that, the expenses that they use, so when they got PPP and they paid payroll and they paid all these other things with PPP, they're still able to deduct those expenses from their revenue, as a tax deductible expense. So that was something that was hanging in the balance there up until the last moment.
So can somebody tell us, practically speaking, is there an average percentage that represents as an enhancement to their grant? So if somebody got $500,000 in a PPP loan that is likely to be forgiven, and they use that money towards paying payroll, obviously on its face, that's equivalent to $500,000 in assistance to that business, or maybe not. Maybe it was, well, I'm trying to articulate. I mean, I've heard from the business community that this is huge. This is the biggest piece of what they did in Washington this around. It really significantly enhances the value of the PPP loan / grant. I'm just trying to get a handle by how much.
Well, it's going to depend on each business, right? And it depends on their expense structure. So I couldn't hazard a guess or anything or give you a percentage, but it definitely is going to help their situation. They don't have to pay tax on the PPP, and they don't have to pay, and whatever they received and used to pay expenses is tax deductible. I think that is great news, especially for businesses that are struggling and would ill afford to be able to pay tax on that money that they received to keep them afloat.
So we heard in finance some concern on the state level that if the state piggybacks that treatment, that a lot of businesses have already paid their taxes for this past year, and that as a result, they may be entitled to significant refunds, which may have an impact on cash flow of the state. So that's a policy issue that the finance committee is going to have to deal with, whether we extend the same treatment on a state level that the feds are doing. But if I understand it correctly, I don't want to confuse things more than they already are, but if somebody has let's use a round number, got $1 million to pay payroll from PPP originally, and they use that $1 million for payroll for their staffing. Presently, their business wouldn't have any payroll expense, but they I'm gonna not go forward with this. I'm gonna let somebody else eventually try and give us some examples that we could understand a little bit more on an individual example basis, how that would affect, how that would enhance the PPP, the value of the PPP grant. And if you're not wanting to do that right now, maybe we can have Craig Bolio come in and explain that to us. Okay, so that's one thing. That's one of the big enhancements in. You say you're going to go through the other ones as well.
Joan,
Right. Go ahead.
I think let's step back and talk about how much PPP we think Vermont businesses will get out of this. So there's roughly half as much money in the PPP program this time as there was the first round. That does not mean that Vermont businesses will get half as much. So last time, like Joan said, was about $1.3 billion that Vermont businesses got. Recognizing as of today, only about 20% of all the PPP loans that were issued have been forgiven. So we don't know what percent of that 1.3 billion will be forgiven versus be a loan. But in this round, if it's $284 billion, the program capped the maximum award to 2 million for most applicants. If you're a first timer, you can go up to 10 still. So it reduced the maximum award significantly. And it also cut out a lot of those big companies that took PPP loans the first time. So it's conceivable. We don't actually have any idea, but it's conceivable that this could be another $1 billion to Vermont. We just don't know what it actually will be, but don't assume that it'll be half as much as the first round. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Does this work similar? We sort of hit a home run with the per capita allocation from the CARES money. Does the PPP money, that has nothing to do with proportionality of the states or small state minimums. It's just who applies, right? And
Yes.
Okay.
But we still ended up making out better than most states. Our bankers did great jobs in getting this money out there. They expanded eligibility. So, now 501c6s, chambers, destination marketing organizations, housing cooperatives, newspapers, broadcasters, radio stations are now eligible for PPP when they weren't before.
Do we have any better understanding of how likely it is that loans will be forgiven? I know you said they made the process really simple for $150,000 loans and less. Is that for the old pot of money, or is that just for this new pot of money, or both? That they made it easier to get your loan forgiven?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually on that. I think that they're in the process of all of the prior ones, and in order to get another one, you had to have expended your first loan. So I don't know whether the simplification is across the board. Ted, do you know?
Yeah, it's for round 1 and round 2. So if you have less than 150, it is literally a 1-page application to.
But is the general thinking that if you have less than a $2 million loan, that it'll still be forgiven?
No, I don't think that's the assumption.
No.
I thought I had heard that they weren't really going to we're going to focus on the much bigger loans in terms of any kind of check, but okay.
There's still, it has to do with the eligible expenses that are included in the forgiveness, right? So, it's payroll. They expanded the list of eligible expenses to include software, human resources, accounting, property damage due to any public disturbances that occurred during 2020 that are not covered by insurance, supplier costs, covered work protection, PPE costs. So they did expand it for applicants on the first draw.
Okay. Thank you.
The second draw, the maximum loan, as Ted said, I think the maximum loan on the second draw is capped at $2 million. And the maximum loan amount is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll based on the 2019 calendar year, or a 1-year look back. And I think, I'm trying to remember if there is a 3.5 time for food and accommodations. Yep. For NAICS Code 72 that we're familiar with, accommodation and food services, they could receive 3.5 times the average monthly payroll, capped at $2 million. It's open to sole props. It's open to self-employed individuals, independent contractors, and small agricultural cooperatives.
Okay.
So a fair amount of expansion, which kind of made us feel like, okay, there's quite a lot quite a lot of folks that are going to be eligible. The thing that they did clarify, which is what gives us pause, is this having to have been in business before February 15th, 2020. And so that's like the first gap that we thought about. Actually, we were thinking about new businesses even before that, because the fact that they were ruled out of our grant program. And again, we were following CARES Act guidance. So
I want to go back to the sole props for a second. I seem to remember that even though we opened our economic recovery grants to sole props, that there didn't seem to be a significant take up. Am I wrong on that?
no, there was significant take up on sole props. So just to refresh, the first time around, we did not, the requirement as per legislation was that you needed at least one employee. And so the only people that we had permitted in to that was people who sort of pay themselves a W-2. And the women and minority group set aside was able to apply even if they did not have an employee, because it was a different set of legislation. Then in round two, we got rid of all of that requirement. And we did have quite a few. And I think that there's, out of like the 2,800 businesses, I believe we had close to 1,000 sole props. So yeah, I think it was significant take up. You might be thinking of the CDBG grant program that was done by lottery, that was administered through BDCC and through Two Rivers. And there, I think they were surprised there wasn't as much take up as there, as we anticipated.
So somebody who got a PPP loan previously, that would reduce the amount that they could get in the second round, I guess, of the economic recovery grants. But the people who applied in the economic recovery grants, if they got money, they hadn't gotten a PPP grant at that point. And if they get a PPP grant now, are they sort of like in a winning position because they can get both without a reduction? I don't know if that, yeah.
No, I think key, we forgot to mention, Joe, in their second round, you have to demonstrate a 25% revenue drop in order to be eligible for PPP this time. So I think they're kind of adopting Vermont's approach to revenue calculations. So our economic recovery grant will count as revenue for that business. So when they go to apply for their PPP, if our economic recovery grant somehow put them so they're no longer in a 25% loss.
Okay. Got it. Yep. Okay.
Michael, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
So cooperatives were also one of our businesses that were challenged in fitting into the right bucket. And this has very specific cooperatives. We had a bunch of artistic cooperatives as well in the creative economy sector. Is there any way we can, this is just ag and housing cooperatives. Anyway, I hope we'll be able to take care of. I know this is expanded, but it isn't. I hope. I hope we'll be able to take care of some of the other hurting cooperatives that weren't covered.
Yeah, I think the way we're kind of advising folks is to please go to their bank or CDFI or VITA and try to apply.
Yeah.
Like, let's not make any assumptions about who is or isn't covered if it's not in all the guidance that we've been reading. And then part of what we're thinking about is if we were to get any additional funding, could we make a requirement that the person needs to show that they tried to apply and they're ineligible from these other sources, so that we are the last money, not the first.
Right.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
This can also wait till the end. I'm skipping ahead and really having a hard time understanding the difference between the EIDL grant and the EIDL loan, and it says advance, and it honestly feels like a paycheck advance program. Like, it really is confusing. It's not on the website. Clearly, I was just on the SBA website. So I'm really confused about what's happening there in it. And that's really hard for low income communities, lower income businesses, people who might have already been left behind to sort of understand if they're getting a loan or grant. I think ACCD could maybe help people with that clarity. But if you look at those slides, it's still really unclear to me just from the slides. Two, I'm sort of learning the divide between ACCD and Department of Labor. We know on the Department of Labor side from our JFO that, women make up 50% of those receiving unemployment benefits in the country, but 75% in Vermont. Are we seeing a similar, women-owned businesses falling behind? Where are we at with the demographics of who's taking this up? We know nationally, women and people of color have been at the back of the line for PPP and other programs. How are we monitoring that and trying to change that here?
I don't think we have numbers yet in order to make any determination. I know that we have the women and minority from the first go around because, well, actually, no, so in the first go around, we had a set aside. But what happened is we were able to ask those questions in the application, and we kept those questions for the second. So as soon as we do the full kind of analysis, we'll be able to tell you how many were women, how many were minority owned. But right now, I don't have that data. I don't have it sliced that way just yet.
I just want to say, to add to that, though, I think we know it's a problem. So before we wait on the back end for information to sort of confirm that, we know nationally it's been a problem from that data. So could we not assume that we're having a similar issue here, and what are we doing to address that?
Right. Well, right now we don't have any additional money, but I think the feds were trying to address that by opening it up to the minority development corporations and the CDFIs having an advance like this week, I think. But if we get additional funding, then perhaps we could do something similar. Would like to hear, what your thoughts are on how to actually sort of even that out. On the EIDL, your point is well taken. It is extremely confusing. It has been from the beginning. The EIDL advance is a grant. The thing that we're still kind of waiting on SBA is quite how this is going to work. So for example, there were people that should have gotten more of an EIDL advance the first time around and didn't. And my understanding is that now there's an opportunity to go and get that residual. In other words, the grant that's owed them. The problem is this time around, it looks like it's targeted only to low-income communities. You can't have more than 300 employees. You had to have suffered an economic loss, meaning a reduction in gross receipts greater than 30%. So there could be a situation where someone is not in a new market tax credit area, which is very, very possible since we have a subset of them around the state, and there would be people left out. So that's my summary. It may not be the most up to date, and I think that it's important that we're having these meetings every week with SBA, and we have Tom Lozon on to give all these examples, but it is still fairly confusing. But what we are able to glean from it is that there will be people left out, and what we want to do is make sure that the state is there to do something. And then when the state is there to do something, to your point, Senator Rahm, if we need to do a priority for women and minority owned, maybe the set aside is not the right way. Maybe it's better to do priority service. I don't know yet, but first things first, we identify gaps. We figure out how much money we need to help those gaps and a methodology to determine that we would be kind of the last funding assistance, if you will.
Senator Clark.
Thank you. Keisha, we did the set asides to address this issue precisely for those reasons. We also, and we need to hear from Sue Minter about the community action agencies, which oversaw the micro business support. during all this. And we need a report from them on that program, because that was money we very specifically targeted for those communities. And so I would, right, don't you think that Joan would complement our work here?
Yeah, the Embrace program.
We need a report from them as well. But obviously going forward, this continues to be a concern, but we have addressed it. This committee has been very focused on making sure that everyone is as equitably enabled as they can be. And I know it's been a priority for everybody.
So Joe,
Just
somebody speaking on Ted?
Yeah, I wanted to just flag, so the Vermont Commission on Women, the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, and CWE and the Vermont Community Loan Fund now have the data that we gave them, a list of all the women-owned businesses that applied and all the minority-owned businesses that applied. I think the Commission on Women already had a pretty good kind of affinity group of women-owned businesses, but we had no minority-owned affinity group list. And this gives us that list, which I think we should talk about how to use.
Right.
I was just going to add something that, and I think obviously someone from the SBA can probably give more detail on this, but I know that when the SBA began accepting PPP applications this week for first draw and second draw, it was only open to CFIs, so community financial institutions, and I won't pretend to know exactly who those are, but I think the early opening of that was designed to ensure that there was increased access for minority-owned businesses, underserved businesses, veterans-owned businesses, women-owned small businesses. I think we still obviously through this week await to see the effectiveness of that priority kind of first opening, but I did just want to point out that I think there was some recognition of priority access for these groups.
Okay. So just to go back, Commissioner, can you just lay out the parameters of the original EIDL program and the new EIDL program, amounts of the grants, the eligibility requirements, and the uptake, and what we've seen in Vermont?
Sure. I think, bear with me when I get to that page. I think originally the people were allowed to apply for EIDL up to $10,000. So you could get up to a $10,000 advance, which was a grant. Somewhere midstream, I think they changed it to $1,000 per employee or something, which led to lots of confusion. I think in Vermont, I have data as of July 15th, there was $35.5 million worth of EIDL advances, 11,425 advances. And that was, I think it was open to any business. I don't think they didn't have it targeted. It was just open, sort of jump ball. And then it began to be clear that some people didn't get the full 10,000. I don't know whether they were running out of money or something happened where, and we saw in our applications too, there were some applicants that were receiving much smaller amounts than $10,000. Anyway, now fast forward to today, it's not open to everybody. It's targeted, the advance. It's targeted. So it's businesses and nonprofits which are located in low-income communities, which I think are yet to be defined, but I do believe it's a census tract area, which is where the new market tax credit areas are. So all of the Northeast Kingdom, some different parts of counties all over the state. But that's going to leave out people because, as we know, not the whole state is a new market tax credit area. So that's kind of an alert. And that's for a new applicant to EIDL. And I heard that there was going to be an idea where you could apply if you were shortchanged the first time around, except if you're not in those targeted areas, you may be out of luck. That was the last we heard from Darcy. I don't know if that's been updated. I don't know, Ted, if you have additional newer information on that, but my understanding is that it may not be the panacea for all who feel that they should have received the full 10,000.
Is there any interplay between PPP and EIDL? I mean, could you apply for both without any questions asked?
Yeah, that's another thing that they fixed, right? So first time around, you were able to apply for both. First time around, what they did when they were doing the forgiveness is that they were subtracting out the EIDL advance from the amount that could be forgiven. So that was not good. So they've done away with that requirement, which I think was very, very welcomed. So I should say that, the targeting is, kind of a prioritization for low-income communities. If there's funds left, then I believe that they'd be able to, is what I'm seeing now.
Okay. So other than you're figuring the EIDL grants and some of your calculations so far in the economic recovery grants, you really have nothing to do with the EIDL program, your department.
No, we don't. We didn't. All we're doing is like leading people to information. We're inviting guest speakers to our webinar so that people could ask as many questions. But generally, PPP is direct through their bank, and EIDL is direct to SBA. What we did do with the economic recovery grants is in the second round of grants, we subtracted out the PPP loan amount because at the time we had no idea whether or not they were going to be forgiven or not. And we had them subtract out the EIDL advance amount. That was our interaction.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions at this point? Because what I'd like to do is go back to page 4 on the chart and start.
Which one? The one, this page, the PPP one?
No, that Ted presented early on with the 190 million.
Yeah,
and start going through some of those programs to refresh our memory a little bit more about what they were, how they've worked out. And I'd like to just stay on the economic recovery line item. Is there anything more you can tell us from what you learned? I know Senator Rahm asked a question about mean versus median. I mean, what can you tell us in terms of dealing with this on a daily basis for the last month? What the typical, if there is a typical grant looked like, where you saw most of the applications coming from, big businesses, small businesses. I mean, I guess we're going to see charts soon, sort of dissecting all this stuff. But can you give us a preview at all?
Sure. I have a spreadsheet. Let me just say, if I could share, that we're working off of. And again, this looks like this is only for the, this looks like this is only for 2.0, but bear with us. I mean, how do I share? Do I have to be host or something?
It's a Nathan question. Nathan, are you with us?
Yes, I just gave her the
export
permission.
the chart as well if you want, or if it's the one I just sent, I can export it and send it to the senators.
Yeah, I'm looking at a spreadsheet. We have
Yeah, actually, that works better, I think, for us if we all just open it up. The thing that I have a challenge with is if I open up the document, then I can't see anybody. I'm sure there's a way to do both on my screen, but so it's hard for me to recognize.
You have a Mac. You have a Mac, so you should be able to do a split screen.
Okay, well, someone will have to show me that after today's hearing.
If you give me just a moment, I can send out the chart that Joan's going through.
No smirking, Keisha.
So, I'm sorry. I thought we were on the initial group of slides that Ted sent us.
Yes, we have that, but Joan was going to show us a spreadsheet.
Oh, okay. Okay. That
It's to give you a little bit of a preview, at least from ACCD's point of view, the sector breakdown, the raw kind of revenue decline, the award amounts in total, in aggregate. Just to give you something, I mean, we don't have the report ready. The number of employees, we have some data for you.
I'll pull that up. One specific question I have, do you have any way of tracking people who may have received monies from the state that are no longer in business?
I guess we would have to, I don't know. I mean, we have not tracked them to see if they're still in business. I mean, this money just went out in December. We have all their contact information and details. I suppose we could. I don't know.
And the question that was asked on the application was sort of a good faith statement that they intend to stay in business even if they weren't operating at the time of the grant.
Right.
Correct?
Right. That is correct.
Okay.
So I don't know, do you have the spreadsheet or?
Have other
I'm
people?
just trying to clean it up just a
Okay.
smidge, Joan, and then I'll send it out. Hold on one second.
And this, of course, leaves out like all of taxes data, and they have the lion's share of the food, the accommodation and food services, and most of the retail. We have some of that. We don't have all of it. People had a choice of where to apply. Generally, if most of their revenue was reported on their sales and use in their rooms and meals filings, they applied through tax. If they had other lines of business, they applied to us. So you'll see we have many, many sectors, right? We had, especially in the second round, food and accommodation. We had education, transportation, retail, just everybody's in there. But the lion's share of the need was food and accommodation. Education was up there as well. Hold on.
Yeah, could you give us just as we're waiting for this, the SPIC code, was it 752, I think?
72, yeah, food and accommodation services.
Right. What percentage of the second round money wound up going to that code?
I think it was about 50%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what percentage of the numerical applications did those groups represent?
I don't know. I'd have to include taxes on that. I mean, we've got, just because in ACCD, we had a total of 3,800 applications, but 262 were food and accommodation. I know that most of that money went to tax to send out to the food and accommodation sector. So we really want to do this in a full comprehensive report so that we're not making any judgments based on just, this part of it. But, we had most of the arts and recreation, healthcare, social assistance, professional, scientific tech services, finance and insurance, information, wholesale trade, utilities, agriculture. There was the whole gamut, really, construction.
So I did just send a chart to the full committee.
Okay.
I've got it up, the sector data.
Yep. So what I was able just to pull just while we were talking was just the sector data. Obviously, the full report will have a more granular, geographic and data. But this is.
Jess, did you just email that to us?
I did.
Okay.
Okay.
And like Joan said, to caveat, this is only for 2.0.
Right. And how much was in ACCD's 1.0? This says 140 million.
Yeah, we had the appropriation was like 76 million, but we ended up spending more like 46, somewhat around there. I'm doing very general because we had to transfer 30 million of our appropriation to tax since they had more of the demand side. So, you know, it's rough right now because I'm kind of rounding, but yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at this. Where would the, we heard a lot from the wedding planners and those kinds of folks that were left out of food and accommodations. Where would they fall in
There were a number of different NAICS codes that they fell into. They fell into sometimes they were in 5.6, sometimes they were in 5.4, and sometimes they were in, there's an other category, 8.1. So it was a mixed bag. I think right before the holiday, forgot which JFC meeting it was, we wanted the money to go into the general pot because we were up against the time limit of getting all the checks out that week of Christmas or the week right before. And then when we went in individually and we looked at each possible wedding sector, and it was across a variety of NAICS codes. We went into the subsector because each of these have more granular levels, and it was a mixed bag.
Okay.
Sorry, Jess, I haven't gotten it from you yet. Has everybody else gotten it?
I've gotten it.
Well, you're closer. It takes a long time to get to Woodstock.
So just one question, and maybe we'll take another 10-minute break and come back to the chart on page 4 and go through those programs of Ted's presentation. But primarily because we heard so much from the wedding industry, and they didn't get what they wanted, and they made a strong plea. I don't mean to just pay attention to the squeaky wheel here, but I would like to know your assessment of how that sector is doing in Vermont right now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, all large events are pretty much canceled, so not very good. And we are hoping that they will be eligible for PPP. And if not, then again, we go into this idea of let's have something where they could come to the state to get the help that they need.
So,
yeah, anybody who's dependent upon gatherings, they're
right.
not gonna. Yeah.
Well, except skiing. I thought you had figured out a way that you were helping the events industry, partly because they aren't recognized in Code 72, and yet they are a key piece of what we in Vermont would consider Code 72. I mean, they are, they are events. They're feeding people. They're housing people for special events. I mean, they're enabling the special events that Code 72 benefits from. And so I had thought you'd found a way to actually complement, to help some of those businesses. Sorry, I guess I thought you had. No?
No, I mean, I think, so, yeah, I mean, 72 was pointed out at 100%.
Right.
There are many businesses that are dependent upon tourism. We just heard from the beverage industry yesterday about how they are also dependent upon tourism, and they are not Code 72, they're in the manufacturing code. Like, when you have something that isn't a discrete NAICS code specific, it gets really, really difficult of where are you drawing the line.
I understand that. And I think though, you told me that people were still, even though they weren't helped at 100%, that
Oh, yeah.
events industry were being helped at
Oh,
what
yeah.
I'm trying to get you to say is they
Yeah.
were being helped at like 44%. I mean, that was where you ended up with everybody else, right?
Correct. Yeah, they were not
Okay,
left
so
out. So
that's what I'm
in other
trying-
words, yeah, the only people that were paid at 100% of their unmet need was the 72 NAICS code. Everybody
Right.
else was paid out at 41.19%.
Right, which is what you were so pleased with, that we were able to get it at least that high. And
Yes,
right.
Okay,
So they weren't not helped at all. They were
Correct.
just helped at 41.19%.
correct.
okay, so two things. One, what we're gonna do is we're gonna break momentarily for 10 minutes and come back to Ted's chart and then take questions or get descriptions on some of these other programs as to their status. And then we'll have about a half hour for Heather. I do want to ask Joan one question. We've talked about a couple of holes here from the federal programs and the residue from our programs. Is there an idea formulating in the administration that you can in any way share with us at this point how to address those holes?
Yeah, that's what I've been kind of referring to, that we're doing this gap analysis, and we will come forward with a proposal to come up with a plan on how to help these businesses that will not be helped by the federal programs.
And that will likely appear in the governor's budget, I assume?
Yep.
So the details of that are still being worked out and not open to
Correct.
release yet. Okay,
Then-
so what I'd ask the committee to do is to pull up the chart that Ted gave, or the memo that Ted slides, and go to that chart with $190 million. We'll start walking through some of the other things that Joan and Ted know about. Spend about 15, 20 minutes on that and give the balance of the morning to Heather to talk about tourism and marketing and whatnot. Okay?
Right, 25 jumping jacks going off to do them,
All right, thanks.
and
Bye.
the stairs.
See you in 10 minutes. Bye-bye. I see we have Senator Brock, Clarkson, Ram.
I'm here too. I can't seem to start my video.
Welcome to my world.
I can't seem to figure out how to respond on my new Mac to any of my emails in Outlook. There's no reply form thing. I can't find it.
We'll get all this down and then we'll be back at the State House.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So I have up on my screen, page 4 of Ted's slides, or at least I did. Let me get that again. Okay. Does everybody have that coronavirus relief fund appropriations?
Yes.
Okay. So who is the best person to stay with? I mean, you can hand it off to just walk down through, give us an overview of these grants, a little bit more flavor as to their design and their effectiveness, or how it's all working out, other than just the amount of money. I mean,
I think I might be the MC of this party, and I'll hand it off as we go down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can start with the Community Loan Fund, okay?
Okay. So the Community Loan Fund is actually a somewhat easy story because it was run to mirror the economic recovery grants that Joan's already talked about. So same criteria for how we calculated the grant awards, same grant making system. The two big changes, change one was that we allowed sole proprietors access to this program, and I guess that's really only one big change. That's the only big difference. So if you were a woman-owned or a minority-owned business, you didn't have to have a single employee to document that you had a W-4 employee, right? So that program, the second big change to this program was we had an enormous help in marketing the program. So this was for round one. This is where we translated all our materials, and not all, a lot of materials, into the 8 most commonly spoken languages in Vermont. This is where we had technical assistance providers actually providing hand-holding, one-on-one help, filling in an application, building the actual profit and loss statements for and with the customer. So those are the two big changes. I don't think there's much more to it.
Was the appropriation fully spent?
Technically, no. So the reason the appropriation wasn't fully spent, I think $4.8 or $4.9 million was appropriated out of this, and then $100,000 or $200,000 waterfalled back to the economic recovery grants. Joan, if you can remind me, did the criteria for the larger pot change in the interim, or what was the trigger that made that happen?
I think it was a date. I think I have to go back in time to see, but I think it was a date. As of a particular date, there was any residual that went back in.
But no woman or minority-owned business that applied was denied money because of
Right. Like, in other words, we set aside that set aside was meant for all women and minority businesses. What we did is we made it solely for sole props, just because there was no other way for them to get funding other than that pot. And then we funded women and minority businesses that had like 1 or more employees out of the general pot of money.
So I'm concerned that this was the first round of monies. When the second round came along, was there any prioritization for women and minorities, or do they just fall into the general pot of money?
It fell into the general pot of money, but there were some extra steps taken. So in round 2, instead of translating all of our materials, we partnered with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont and CWE, so that and we translated a page into the 8 most spoken languages that outlined the program, and then said, if you'd like to apply, call this phone number. And it was the Associated Africans Living in Vermont. And they would actually connect with CWE and provide one-on-one technical assistance in spoken word, as opposed to just translating a document. We also made audio files that were linked to this document, so that those languages that aren't spoken frequently, aren't written frequently, but are really spoken more often, we could reach those numbers. So we did a targeted outreach, but there was not a set aside of dollars.
Okay, and the next question I have is probably applies to all groups, but the 654 businesses that applied originally under this grant, they were limited to a grant of 10%, correct, of their revenue law. What was that calculation in the original one again?
10% of the 2019 revenue.
Or the 2019 revenue. So I would assume that the loss in revenue over the 7-month period or whatever in the second round might be a little higher. I mean, it was reduced in some cases to 42% of that. Did a lot of these 654, were there repeat applicants in that group?
Yes, I don't have a one-for-one look at that, but it looks like in total, I believe there were about 4,000 applications and really 2,800 unique businesses. So in there's definitely repeat people. And as we reviewed the applications, we could see what they received the first time around. So there were definitely those, but I couldn't give you a one-for-one, like how many of these were repeat. If you want that, we'll have to look at that for the next report.
Well, I guess you generally have a feel overall in the economic recovery program. What would be your guesstimate about how many came in for a second grant?
About 1,000. I would say roughly it's about 1,000 people came in for a second grant. Oh, of this subset, I don't know.
Not of the subset, overall.
Yeah, overall, about 1,000 repeats.
And how many were in the first round?
Oh,
Says 2,800 up top, and then, oh no, that's the overall. Okay.
yeah.
No, how many came in the first round, would you say?
I
2,000?
think it's like, it's just shy of, is it just shy of 3,000? Yeah, I'd have to look at, all the numbers are blending, but yeah. What we did is on that report that Ted has, we made the 2,800 is the unique applicant. So that's 1 and 2 together.
Got it. Okay.
Of all the businesses that applied.
Yes.
Right.
In ACCD, sorry, this is only ACCD. We
Correct.
would have to combine with tax, which we're still in the process of doing.
Would you say the second grant for the people who were reapplying was larger than the first grant in dollars?
Yeah, if I had to generalize, I would say absolutely. The numbers that we saw in the second round were definitely larger than the first round. General comment, right? Because
Right.
remember, we did it based on that revenue loss. We also had a $300,000 cap as
Right.
opposed to the 50,000. So generally,
Right.
these were larger.
Okay. Let's go on, Ted. I interrupted you. Let's see if I can go a little faster, but Arts Council?
Michael, can I just ask one question?
Sure, I can't, I'm sorry. If I have this in front of me, I can't see you, so speak up.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. So am I back at looking at people? Okay.
Yeah.
Keisha has a question.
I was just wondering if you're tracking how many people and in what languages. So I know we're asking for a lot of data. I'm not asking for that data now, but are you tracking the number of people who need language services and in which languages?
We're not, but we could ask our partners to make sure we get that.
That would be really helpful at some point.
All right, Arts Council.
Yep.
Arts Council was a $5 million separate appropriation to the Arts Council for them to run for nonprofit arts organizations and creative organizations. In developing our program, this program was nestled in the language for our program, so they had to follow all of our rules except for one. They had one different rule, which was about revenue calculation. If you remember this,
Right.
Reducing their grants and philanthropic from their revenue.
Right.
Right.
So in the end, we agreed that the Arts Council and the agency executed an MOU that would have us run the program through Salesforce, through our grant management system, but they would actually review the applications and make some of the revenue calculations.
Okay.
And it was a pretty slick program. Again, Amy and Karen and their teams deserve kudos. We did 115 organizations out of this. We did have some glitches. We had some organizations that didn't qualify for the maximum grant. So if you think of the big ones like the Flynn, the Paramount, these big arts venues, they didn't qualify for the full grant amount because of their revenue calculation. I should point out we carried that nonprofit revenue calculation over to all nonprofits in our program just for consistency, which created a lot of headaches. So lessons learned there. Deal with nonprofits in a different way. So because of this, and because of the statute that you folks gave them this appropriation differently than you gave it to us, we ended up giving them about $700,000 that was left over for them to increase the grant amounts to those bigger organizations. So it worked out in the end, but it was a little complicated.
So all the money that was appropriated and then some was given under the rules to 115 organizations in this first round.
This one similarly had a small waterfall, meaning there's about $100 and some odd thousand left over. The majority of that was because the Arts Council didn't need all their admin money.
Right.
So the Arts Council didn't need all $75,000 to administer the program because we had the grant management system and did a lot of the work with them. And then it was about timing, again, that just fell, I think it was less than $100,000 that fell into the general pot.
I don't know if this is going to hold true for the rest of these things, but it's kind of remarkable that the program parameters on these two $5 million programs fit so neatly with the applications that came in. I mean, it's almost like, you would think that there would be either less businesses applying or less money used. And I mean, it was sort of shooting in the dark when we appropriated the money. We didn't know whether it would be enough or too much, but it seems to have come in both of these cases extremely close to exactly what the applications required.
I think you're partially correct. The reality is there's some accounting that went on here. So for the right, we wanted to get as much money out as possible to this group of people. So like Joan said, when we saw what was coming in and we had a view of what was in, we were able to say, okay, let's just do this for the sole props, and that'll take up about $5 million. In the Arts Council one, we had about $1.5 million left with 2 weeks left, 3 weeks left before the waterfall. And instead of letting that waterfall into the general pot, trying to honor legislative intent, we went back to the Arts Council and said, okay, you can spend it however you want, as long as you don't violate the central tenet of your legislative authority. So it wasn't as if we had the perfect number in mind. We made sure that we didn't waste any of the money and followed the intent.
And the need was so big in the creative sector that additional flexibility, I know, was incredibly appreciated.
Oh, Amy and Karen might not talk to me because they wanted more. We gave them.
I know. Some of us were part of, right? Still, it was good.
Okay, let's go down to the next one.
A&R, I think, is the simplest of all of them. This was actually an appropriation to A&R, but we entered an MOU with A&R where we would actually give them our applications. They had access to Salesforce, and they would pick the ones they wanted to fund, and they followed our same grant rules. So every day or every couple of days, we'd give them our grant list and say, pick the ones that meet your statutory authority and tell us if you want us to fund and at what dollar figure. And that's how we did it.
Michael, can I ask a question just looking back up?
please.
I just want to make sure I understand. Did the money directly for people who were not eligible for the $1,200 payments from the federal government go through you at all? Or was that labor or the racial equity division? Did that wasn't you?
No, I don't know where, I think Susanna is working with,
BCF, I think, but
yeah, a different, an independent nonprofit is what I'm thinking. Oh, actually, right. I think it is VCF.
okay, so that just, it wouldn't show up in this. Okay.
So moving on to the next line, when we get to Working Lands Enterprise Fund, this again was not our pot of money. It was an appropriation. Actually, this one was an appropriation to ACCD, but we entered an MOU with the Agency of Agriculture, where they would actually do all of the work. We didn't touch it at all. They did all the work. The Working Lands Enterprise Board actually, I think, made these recommendations. And then as they funded them, they would send us a request to fund out of our account, and we would fund with this 2.5. And that funding had some ups and downs, as in its take rate, but in the end was, I think, oversubscribed and a big success.
So does this, this is a question that Senator Brock would generally ask. Is this like one-time monies that were given to these organizations, or is this going to be base funding that we're going to have to continue? And does the CARES, well, let me stop there. I don't know if there were CARES restrictions on the money as to how it could be used.
Yep, one-time money. All of us spent it as if it had to be spent by December 30th. So you'll see a great WeLab report in about 2 weeks that shows every project that was funded with this. And no, it doesn't affect their future appropriations. It will certainly affect the future demand for the program because this allowed more people to get it and more people will expect it next year.
Okay.
Michael, may I ask a question? It's Allison.
Yes.
Can you see us yet?
I have to go back to see you, but go ahead.
Okay, no, I'm just, so Ted, on A&R and Working Lands, it sounds like Working Lands was oversubscribed, but with A&R, was anything returned? Was it all used up?
I believe we had about $15,000 left over, and it was because there wasn't an application for that dollar figure that would have fit. We funded a lot more than 35 outdoor recreation businesses in the end.
Good, but through other program, other
Main
means.
recovery program. Yep.
Got it. Thanks. And Working Lands was oversubscribed. Okay, great.
So taking on to Restart Business Technical Assistance. This was an original $2.5 million appropriation. We put out an RFP that gave our general vision, which was we wanted businesses to get technical assistance from other Vermont businesses so that it was a twofer. You had like a Vermont accountant or a Vermont attorney or a Vermont marketing organization that was going to get paid to provide needed technical assistance to a Vermont business that was impacted by COVID-19. We also required every applicant to have a recovery navigator, somebody who would sit down with the business, talk through their options, and attach them to the right option for additional economic recovery or to find a technical assistance provider. We had 4 or 5 respondents, Champlain College, which got about $300,000 from this. The Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund that got about $100,000 to focus on forestry businesses. The RDCs, which got $1.4 million to focus on each RDC ran a program, and NCIC, so it's 4, not 5. NCIC got money to run a program, their technical assistance and financial assistance program that they were already running in the kingdom.
In the chamber.
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. There was the 5th, the Vermont Chamber, which got, in the end, a little more than $200,000 to partner with On the Fly, an Addison County-based organization that Sass Stewart was leading, that was providing free technical assistance to restaurants and hospitality businesses. And this allowed them to scale that to 5 or 10 times what they were doing for the hospitality sector. In the end,
So the 600 businesses are folks that came to you asking for technical assistance?
yep, they're not to us, but to the partners. So
To the partner.
everything from the mom and pop general store that went to the RDC, to the restaurant that went to On the Fly, to some of the larger businesses that might have gone to Champlain to access some collegiate kind of level brains.
And did it mostly talk about sustainability or recovery planning, or could they say, you know, I don't want to pay my accountant anymore. I want you to be my accountant for free?
No, they had to fill out an application that had attestations that said that they were impacted by COVID and they needed this help specifically because of COVID-19. And then the navigator would actually sit down with them and build a statement of work that made sure that it had something to do with COVID-19.
So not just, I can't afford my accountant anymore, so I need help.
Right.
Okay.
And we went to the JFC and we needed another $750,000. So that's why it's 3.25. But in the end, the JFC took about 3 or 4 weeks to give us the green light on that. And the RDCs decided they were unable to spend the money in a responsible manner with only a month left. So we did return about $400,000 of the JFC allocation to the CRF.
So this seems like an ongoing need, don't you think? I mean, we're still in the pandemic, we're still in the recovery stage. You think the businesses that have needed it have gotten it and there's no more need out there for this kind of help?
I think there's definitely need. I think we had this incredible surge in the last 10 months that required us to escalate the service providers. It's unclear whether or not the SBDCs, the RDCs, and CWEs of the world can handle the current volume. So I think if we gave this program more money, people would use it. It's just unclear if we need that level of surge right now. I think the RDCs would argue we do because they're seeing increased traffic, but yeah.
Is that a consideration for the upcoming budget as far as you know? I'm not asking for a commitment, but it seems like some level of this needs to be ongoing.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about other sources of funding. You know, we have some CDBG money not left over that hasn't been spent yet. That's disaster related. There's the EDA that has this, you know, a couple $100 million of disaster money sitting out there. So we're working with them to try to see if there's a better fit. Honestly, we didn't think there would be general fund money available for this, even though the need's there.
Okay.
But, well, an additional, you're right, probably that's right. If we can find it in EDA or CDBG, it would be great. But it is beefing up, it would potentially in the future, as we work our way through this, it would beef up. If we could, I could see a beefing up of the RDC's support, technical support money.
Okay.
Everyone eats. I covered this earlier. Just to go through this, we received $5 million originally, then a JFC request for another $1 million, and then $400,000 JFC request like the last week of December. This program has been deemed eligible by FEMA for reimbursement. So this $6.4 million, we should, in theory, see $4.8 million of it come back over the next couple of months. And that will have the flavor of CRF money. So this is what we and the governor's budget team are trying to figure out. How do you keep everyone eats going for the next few months through the end of the state of emergency, and what flavor money is best for it? So that's the proposal we're working on to bring to you either in the budget or the budget adjustment.
So just so you know, I've put a bill in to require that this program continue at the same level it was before, because I think it's such a win-win-win situation, first from federal dollars and then general fund dollars if there's a shortfall. But it sounds like it probably will be a budgetary item, but there will be a bill being introduced as well on this. And it sounds like, depending upon how long you want to sustain it for, how long did it go for?
It was from August until December. It was running $300,000 a week, then $400,000, and right now we're budgeting at $500,000 a week.
Okay, and it's ongoing right now?
We're in a pause until the 18th, I believe. That was partially because of the funding uncertainty, but also because the program was stood up real quick and they had to fix some of the mechanics of it to make sure it worked more smoothly going forward. And they're ready to roll, I think, on the 18th. And it's funded now. We took $1.6 million of the returned FEMA money and dedicated it to the program that should run us through late February, mid to late February.
What happens to the rest of the FEMA money?
Well, we don't have it. The way FEMA works is it takes several weeks or months to do the process of getting reimbursed. So right now we only have about $600,000 of the FEMA money. By the time we're spending the money, we think we'll have about 1.6 of it. So this is the game we need to figure out with you and with appropriations and the other committees of jurisdiction. What's the right source of money? In theory, you could just keep using this FEMA money until it ends, but there might be a better place to use that CRF money. Because when this whole program's over, it will have cost us about $18 million, and we will have only had to spend 25% of that to run that program. I don't think I was clear there. The answer is
I followed you except for how you got to $18 million.
Yeah, nice idea.
it costs us $6 million now, and if we run it through the end of the fiscal year at $500,000 a week, that'll cost us another 12.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we have to find a way to certainly advance the FEMA money. So we should avoid the pauses as much as possible until we can figure it out. I mean, people are hungry out there. So, okay. Ski area.
Ski area recreation safety program, as I went through the details before, I don't want to go.
No, I just have one question on that. Did it really get spent on pandemic PPE kind of stuff? Wasn't it intended to do that, to reimburse ski areas for, you know, protective equipment and, you know, modernizing their ticket sales so people don't have to come in contact with each other, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, we'll have the final reports at the end of the month. We've only received 3 or 4 requests for scope changes of the projects, but when we required the applications to include cost estimates and summaries of the project they were doing. And as you said, they had to be CRF eligible, which meant it had to be related to safety and safety measures, period, and in COVID related measures. So yes, we're going to have receipts that show every penny that's spent and how it was spent. As I mentioned, some of the more creative ones, you know, if you go up to Jay Peak right now, you'll see that they pretty much moved their lodge outside, and that cost a lot of money for heaters and wind screens and things along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Just down the road from me at Catamount, a small community cross-country ski area,
Right.
They put a shed outside where they're keeping all their rental equipment, so you don't need to go in their cramped rental shop to get their rental equipment.
Right. I've been there.
Yeah.
Okay. So was there a cap on how much a ski area could get?
Yeah, I think the original cap we put out there was $200,000 when we put the applications out, but we told applicants they could apply for more in the event that we didn't get the demand. We were oversubscribed by $1 or $2 million. And so we capped it at a little under $200,000 per ski area.
Okay, so I'm gonna hold off on the housing ones here. We're gonna be doing a lot of housing next week. Can we maybe move to Heather on the last two
Sounds good.
programs? I think she could give us a little bit more detail on those two, right?
Yep.
And for some reason, I thought the consumer stimulus, I was a big fan of that, but it didn't make it the distance. I thought we were stuck with just the original 500,000. So maybe Heather can explain that to us. Heather, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay.
How's
She gets
everybody?
the big gold star for patience.
Exactly.
Well, there's so much to learn.
Thank you, Ted, by the way. Thank you.
So in terms of the consumer stimulus, in terms of those two buckets, I think that the chart kind of oversimplifies the division of those two pots of money, because the 2.5 that was originally allocated was really in the original language was for consumer stimulus and restart marketing. And then the additional 4 that was added was again to stimulate consumer spending, but not specifically for stimulus. So in essence, we really grouped those two buckets of money together. But we ended up running 3 different consumer stimulus programs. So the first was that $500,000, quote unquote gift card program. This was really about giving discounts to businesses. And that was successful, and I will be happy to follow up with lots of different metrics on all of these programs. The reason why they're not in the chart just now is just because there are several different programs, and we're still working through exactly, the metrics that we've gotten for each of them. But for that discount program, just to remind folks, this was a program where we had over 1,000 businesses show interest in participating. It was targeted at restaurants, retail, lodging, attractions, entertainment, all the businesses most affected by COVID-19. We were able to use that $500,000, divvied it up between those different sectors, and then had a first come first serve offer for consumers to choose where they might like to get a discount from. We had, almost immediate oversubscription, lots of lessons learned how we might do that again. For one, this program was designed around making sure that the businesses received the incentive, and that's really how it was organized. We did talk in the fall about if we were to do something in the future, maybe we would design it from the consumer perspective. So again, lessons learned on that. But in terms of the pilot program that was run, we were able to give funds to 975 businesses. And then what happens is that when a consumer decides that they want to redeem their discount, they go in, they have the face value of that discount, which on average was $30, and then hopefully they spend more. We have seen through the months that the program has been in place that we're getting a 73% overspend. So the average discount amount is about $26 it works out to, and that the average first time spend in those businesses is $46.
So
and I have
just for Senator Rahm's benefit, this was a pilot project that the administration spent $500,000 on, and came in with a proposal to spend another 20 million or 10 million, I can't remember. And our committee endorsed that, and we hit a brick wall in the appropriations committee. I'm just wondering, is there any life to this idea for this year?
I mean, I think, in reality, I'm not sure that there really are general funds that are going to be available for this. If there were more broad-based federal funds available in a second round of stimulus where there was some flexibility, I think it would definitely be on the list of things that we would want to consider. I mean, it has great potential. I mean, one of the other statistics I can share is that the consumers who use these discounts, 70% of them were first-time visitors to those local businesses. And in, the folks were surveyed at the time of purchase, and then 30 days after, 66% intend on returning to those businesses. So we have done calculations that the rule of thumb is that folks will generally go back to a business 3 times in a year. And if we look at the cumulative impact of just what this pilot program put in, we're looking at, $1.5 million. It's almost a 3 times return on investment. So there's a lot of potential. Again, lessons learned. The benefit to the way we organized this particular round was that the businesses received the value of the discounts, whether the consumers showed up or not.
Right.
That has turned out to be helpful because right now we've only seen about a 45% redemption rate, but the businesses received the money up front. And that really was the intent. It was, how do we keep these folks open? So again, in terms of going forward, we do want it to be a win-win. So we want the businesses to get that money up front, but we also want the consumers to benefit from that discount.
I, for one, would be very interested in continuing to work on this with you. Hopefully, maybe the Biden administration will have some flexible money to do this. Has there been any literature on similar programs around the country on their success?
I'd have to do a little more digging to find out. I could definitely give you some other examples. Certainly the vendor we worked with on this program has done other types of programs around the state. Around the state in different states. I definitely shared this idea with other colleagues, and other states have been looking into it. I know Rhode Island was looking into a program like this, so I could definitely follow up and see how far along they've gotten.
Okay. So where is the other $2 million in consumer stimulus spent?
So then we also created a regional marketing and stimulus grant program. So this was, our attempt to really make sure that we were focusing on those regional and local organizations and how much that we could help them and they could help us in this recovery effort. So these were grants of up to $10,000 that we made available to downtown organizations, chambers of commerce, RDCs, those types of organizations that are embedded in their communities, for them to create the types of programs that they thought would be most successful in promoting spending and supporting their local businesses. So we ended up providing 61 grants to different organizations throughout the state. And they created advertising campaigns and contests and passport programs, local currency programs, those types of things to encourage folks to spend within their individual communities. Those applications were due at the end of August. We were able to disperse the money in October. So those programs really came online in that sweet spot right in November and into December. So we're still getting back the reporting on exactly how many businesses were able to participate in that. But thankfully, we've received some really nice feedback from communities that this really was helpful, that it really did drive some traffic. You had the added benefit that, the promotion for a lot of these programs utilized local media, which is another way that we were able to, to support, just the whole entire infrastructure of the state. So again, still getting back numbers on exactly how many customers took part in that and how many businesses took part in that. But we did.
Will we see a report on that and get some examples?
Yep.
And I assume this is stuff that could be viewed as one-time expenditures as opposed to now having created an ongoing need.
These were one-time expenditures. I mean, we did require, receipts for all of their expenses. And, that's part of the, we wanted to give them as much time as possible to spend the funds. There was actually just a very few, but there was a few folks who couldn't spend all the funds, and we ended up getting a very small percentage back. But yes, we are compiling all of that reporting right now.
Okay.
Woodstock had a robust passport program.
Okay.
I mean, I saw it on the ground. I have one. I have one in my purse, which I didn't finish getting all stamped, but I think lots of communities had that.
They did, and I also heard from communities that it was just a real nice sense of civic pride, that people really thought about, like, hey, where am I spending my money? And to me, that's really what this is all about. The only thing this is all about. I mean, clearly it's about, helping our businesses and our communities survive, but it's really about helping people really think about how they make those spending decisions and you know, where they're spending their money.
Right. Keisha has a question.
It's a bit of a comment. I know we've been asking you for a lot of data, but I also think some of the storytelling is really helpful, and we probably all heard it in our local regions and communities. But beginning to collect ideas about who we might hear from for a cross section of who benefited and sort of where they are as businesses, I think would be really helpful for us to actually spend, Mr. Chairman, if I may, you know, half a day or something hearing from the impacted businesses directly and hearing their stories. So we have a good cross section of the state.
That's a good idea. I think what we'll do is we'll wait till we get all these reports in, and they will trigger questions and ideas for, you know, stories to come in, I think. So probably later this month or early next month, we can look at that. So we have about 5 minutes left, Heather, and I want to hear about the marketing, but can you just briefly tell us where the rest of the consumer stimulus money was spent?
Sure. The final consumer stimulus program we did was to set up the buyvermontmade.com website right before the holidays. So this was a program that we did jointly with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. We had about 400 businesses, Vermont businesses, sign up. That was focused both on maker producer businesses as well as retail businesses. And we promoted that both within the state as well as out of state. And again, that just ended at the end of the year. So we're still getting back the metrics on that, but it was really a platform for folks to be able to access all those different types of Vermont businesses when they were thinking about shopping for the holiday season. As far as
that website's still up, I take it?
That website is still up, and it's an open conversation really as to what the future of that website might be. You know, we certainly scratched an itch that's been out there in terms of how to give our Vermont businesses that kind of a platform to promote themselves. You know, like everything, it takes resources to maintain it, and lessons learned with that project as well. I mean, we have created and stood up a lot of programs in a short amount of time, and through that we've learned. So there were things that we can improve.
How much did you spend on that?
We spent $400,000 on that.
Okay.
And if we wanted to look at it now, Heather, what would we look for? Buy Vermont Made?
Buyvermontmade.com. Yep.
Okay. Let's go to Restart Vermont Marketing and finish up here if we can.
Okay. Yeah, so the Restart Vermont Marketing, I mean, that was really kind of a tale of us needing to continue to stay flexible and just be really aware of the conditions on the ground as we were getting out our marketing messaging. So, you know, it started over the summer with us promoting in-state activities to our residents to make sure that they were also, you know, kind of activating, doing whatever they can to support the local economy with staycations and so forth. As the travel map came out, our marketing efforts were directed at those who could travel most easily, to those affectionately referred to green counties. And in that process, we did create a new campaign called A Place All Its Own. And again, I'd love the chance to go into some more detail, but in general, you know, that extra money we were able to promote that campaign nationally, which we have never had the chance to be able to do. We were able to layer in just, you know, what makes Vermont special, as well as the safety messaging, because, you know, in all honesty, we are really planting the seed for future travel because of the restrictions that are in place. And to be truthful, you know, right as that effort was really getting underway, you know, the virus surged again. And so then we needed to pivot our messaging to really focus in ahead of the ski season on the know the rules, quarantine required, plan ahead. So there was a mix of messaging where we had to react. You know, we were able to access a whole broad range of tactics. So for instance, we were able to work with the Discovery Network and Outside TV to create brand video assets that were seen, you know, nationwide, to promote safe travel, as well as, you know, we did native advertising. So we had articles in New York Magazine, and then when the conversation had to shift, you know, we were able to work with publications like the Wall Street Journal and the Boston Globe to be able to tell a longer story than you can tell in just a banner ad that says quarantine required. But, why Vermont was putting these restrictions into place and how, we really were looking at this as protecting our visitors as well as our residents. And, hopefully folks could really see that what we were doing was protecting all of us and really our brand for the future. I really think that we need to think of this in terms of, we have a future, and let's not forget that when we're planting these seeds. So, and then finally, I think the final piece of that, besides those sort of traditional marketing tactics that we utilize, and again, we were able to do streaming audio and digital advertising and all sorts of different types of things. But then, as we've seen, it is not easy for folks to come here, and that's part of the real financial crisis in the lodging and hospitality industry. And so we did use a portion of the money to create brand experiences that folks could enjoy from afar. So the first one we did was a Little State Big Laughs event that we did with the Vermont Comedy Club right before Thanksgiving. It was sort of our test about how to do a live event that then folks all over the country could access, and we could create that brand affinity, kind of nurture that. And then more recently, we created the Forever Green concert series. For anyone who hasn't had a chance to listen to those, the final one is actually this Saturday night at 7:00. We did 5 different concerts, and they were a combination of a local act that we were able to, they were taped at Higher Ground, either a local or regional act that we were able to tape on premise at one of our Vermont ski resorts, as well as a national act to try and bring that attention to Vermont, to those local musicians, give them some exposure. And we did it in a way where we had a host that would interview the musicians, interludes between the songs, and it's really given a really nice opportunity for those artists and musicians to talk about why Vermont is so important in terms of their music, why they live here, really what they think about Vermont. And I really would encourage everyone to take a look, because there's some really great testimonials there, truly in people's own words as to what Vermont means to them. And I really look at it as a real success in terms of how we could promote the state, both for visitation and for relocation, in a way when we can't invite folks here today. And so that was, again, something different that we tried. So forevergreenvt.com is my plug on that.
How many hits, how many visitors, how many people taking advantage of it?
It is growing every day. The last I saw, I think we're up to almost at least 100,000 views. So, we're only, I would say only, but for our biggest concert so far, I think we had about 2,000 people watching live. But we all know it's hard to get anyone to show up at a certain time and place these days when everything is on demand. But what we're seeing is that with each performance, folks are going back and watching the previous performances. And so that's been really encouraging. And again, I would be more than happy to share all of these metrics and statistics with you folks as soon as we're able to get them together. But the final one is this weekend.
So great.
Has the $4 million been fully spent?
Yes, we were diligently paying attention to the rules to make sure that we didn't leave anything on the table. So the fact that, at the very last moment, there was a little bit, I would rephrase that. We have about maybe $150,000 left that we're using to stretch, some of these programs that we've already started, with the safe travel messaging a little bit farther into January. But the bulk of that money has been spent, the vast majority, pretty much all of it. I will say that, one of the reasons why we partnered with the Discovery Networks and Outside TV was that the brand videos that we're able to create with them based on their footage. So that was just a nice synergy where we had such a short amount of time to spend this money. We wanted to be effective. By partnering with them, we could use the footage they already had of Vermont in all 4 seasons. And now we can actually use those videos to promote past this time period. Clearly, it will take money to get those ads back on the air, but at least now we have the assets. So that was one way that we really wanted to kind of stretch this one-time investment into how we could continue marketing in the future.
Is there a report that we're going to get? Are you prepared that basically summarizes all the testimony you just gave on these two line items?
Yes, I am working now diligently on different reports for each one of these different programs for you.
Great.
Michael, I can see how Forever Green could segue into a stopgap farmers night series here and save our tuchus for the remote legislative session.
I'm sure you could.
Maybe Heather and I need to chat.
All
I mean,
right.
I can't state enough how much potential there is in that. I mean, we've called it, a Vermont adventure in music. It could be a Vermont adventure in all sorts of different things. And it was just
Yeah.
it's a really nice way for us to also to be able to shine a light on our arts and culture sector. We've really tried in everything we've done to make sure that we're hitting as many different parts of the tourism community as possible in the ways that we can support them.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody.
Right.
Senator Clarkson and I and Nathan are going to be working on scheduling right after this. So I don't know if Nathan, what do you recommend we do? Should we just do another Zoom call or just stay on this one, the three of us?
We can talk about that in